The way we fetch the data from Firebase in the created hook is fine for prototyping, but now that we got it working, we should tidy it up. In vuex, actions are responsible for dealing with asynchronous code, like the firestore calls, and we should not commit mutations outside of actions. So, each firestore call should be an action. Let's start with the fetch thread action. This action needs to know the ID of the thread to fetch. Let's log a message in the console here to indicate that we are fetching a thread from Firebase. In here, I will move the code that gets the thread from Firebase. The squiggly red line here under Firebase is letting me know that it's not defined. That's because we haven't imported it into the store file yet. Let's do that. Then I'll switch this.id with the ID argument and remove this.$store. When we call the fetch thread action, we need to know when it's done, so we can proceed with fetching other related resources, such as the thread's user. Thus, we can return a promise that will resolve when the Firebase call is done. That is, inside the callback after committing the setThread mutation. In resolve, we can pass the thread object. Let's use our action in the thread show page. We can remove the manual call to firestore for the thread and replace it with a call to dispatch the new fetch thread action. Since the action returns a promise, we can change our created lifecycle hook to an async function, and then get the value of the thread by awaiting the return of the dispatched action. Let me also clean up a couple remaining characters from when we were manually calling the firestore. If we take a look in the browser, everything works as before, and this time we also see the fire message in the console. We can move on now with the rest of the resources. Here we fetch the user, so let's create an action for that. I'll duplicate fetch thread and make the necessary changes. Back in the thread page, we can replace that with our action. Here, we don't need to do anything when the action is done, so await is not necessary. We also fetch the user for each post, so we can use our action there as well. Okay, lastly, let's create an action to fetch a post by duplicating fetch user and making the necessary changes. And now we can remove the manual call to firestore for the posts in the created hook and replace it with our action. We will need to make the callback function for the forEach async so that we can then await for the result of the post. With that, we've managed to make our components code shorter and create reusable actions while we are following best practices and we don't commit mutations directly from our components. We are not using the Firebase library in ThreadShow anymore, so let's just remove that import statement. If we check it out in the browser, the thread page works just fine. And we also get to know what's going on by reading the console messages.